Yeah, you're rolling, you know, Ishmael. I said, we're rolling now still. You ready yet? Yeah.
Content over everything.
Yeah, respect for you and agreeing to do the thing. I know, like I said, man, you seem like a very busy man, you get me?
We're just trying to thing, you know what I mean? So, and got stuff and projects that I want to sort of complete. So, just chipping away at them as I always, you know what I mean? Always have X amount of projects in the bag, and I chip away at them. And sometimes, you know, you reach some 3 years later, or 4 years later, or even 5 years later, and it just comes into fruition at the right time. It's like germinates. You chip away at it, you get more knowledge on where you're going, and then it just kind of comes to fruition.
Yeah. Well, on the subject of Carnival still, but that's why that's one of the reasons I wanted to link it. That's what we're going to try to deal with now. Obviously, when I say Carnival, the impression that man get right now, well, me personally, I can speak for myself. Like, you go Carnival, gather them, dancing thing, it's a hype thing. Like, personally, I ain't never really witnessed no danger myself, you get me? But I heard like there's a lot of rumours surrounding Carnival to do with danger and rare. But me personally, anytime I've gone, it's been a nice vibe to get me. Like I said, for just some music, people them smoking, drinking, just enjoying themselves, you get me?
Well, Carnival's more than just sort of, you know, out there jumping up and down to music and drinking.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's a whole culture and the tradition behind the Carnival, and that certainly when we look at the roots of the Notting Hill Carnival and its roots in Trinidad. Do you know what I mean? You know, it's about mass, it's about the pans, it's about a whole heap more than the sound systems. The sound systems have come in later. And a lot of young people have bought into the sound systems as opposed to the traditions of the Carnival, and I think it's important that young people reconnect with that culture because it then gives more context to what they're dealing with it as a cultural movement. Yeah,
because I wanted to get your perspective because, as I said, that's the impression that I get myself. But obviously, I've done a little bit of research myself, and like back in the day, it was different to how it is now, and it's something to do with there was a riot that took place one time, some racism or something like that.
Well, we had the riots of '58. And there was a lot of sort of racial tensions in this area. You've got sort of new immigrant groups coming into this country, into poor areas, primarily poor areas, because Ladbroke Grove was seen as a slum, a ghetto, a very deprived and marginalised area, represented by the white working classes. And so when one immigrant group came in, of course, it's a threat or a challenge on all of those resources. Again, you have people like Enoch Powell, Oswald Mosley, you know, Tyndall. You had all of these sort of characters stoking the flames of racial prejudice amongst the sort of working classes for their own sort of political sort of gains. And as a result of that, there were riots in '58. You then had the murder of Kelso Cochrane in 1959.
So how did the actual riot start though? Like what actually kicked it off?
There was an incident whereby there was a woman called Madge Morrison, who I knew very well. I knew her son, grew up with her son Lloyd Morrison, and the father, his father Raymond Morrison. And there was an argument that took place. White youths had seen this, and then began to round off on Raymond. Madge went to defend him, and they went and attacked both of them, and it sort of sparked from there. You know, the ingredients was already there, and so as a means of the assault on those two, then mobs then went around attacking blacks. In the area. So there was already build up to it. There was momentum building up to that. That was just the spark.
You saying like the rivers of blood and all them things there. So when you say there was riots, it was like mobs of white people moving to black people.
Yes, and black, the white mob, as you describe it, were on the offensive, and the blacks were on the defensive, and so you had places like Totterbags, you had individuals like Baron Baker. They launched a fight back against white racists. The rioting went on for days. You'd also have other blacks coming from other communities to defend the community of Ladbroke Grove. It was very well known that people from Brixton jumped in their cars. Some of the people from the Caribbean and Africa from Brixton jumped in their vehicles, came down, reinforced the black community, and you know, fortified their defences and stood up to the white racists. It was a very, very important victory because it showed those people who were susceptible to the racist ideology, that the black and African and Caribbean immigrants who were here were not going to be a walkover.
So what Carnival was running before that, or did that have something to?
As a result of those sort of racial tensions that were brewing, and Claudia Jones decided to host an indoor carnival cabaret at St Pancras Town Hall, and that was about celebrating Caribbean culture. It was about expanding knowledge and understanding about the people of the Caribbean.
Okay, and if you look at education to like the people that would have been potential.
It was a celebration of Caribbean culture for Caribbean people, but also that whites can actually see and understand a bit more about the culture. If you look at the program that she produced in 1959, when she did her first indoor event, on the cover of that brochure it says that the proceeds of the sale of this program will go towards paying the fines of both black and white youth. You know, so Claudia Jones was a communist. So
the fines from what?
The fine for those who were arrested during the riots.
Okay.
Do you mean? And so she, as a communist, didn't discriminate even then. So she was even willing to pay the fines of those white youths who were accused of attacking black people. She was a communist. She had left Trinidad at the age of 7. She moved to New York, became very active, became a communist. She was actually on the national committee. National committee of the Communist Party. She was arrested. She was jailed for un-American activities, and then she was eventually deported. Yeah. After she served her sentence, they were going to deport her back to Trinidad, but the Governor General of Trinidad at the time, who's still talking about the pre-independence, the Governor General of Trinidad at the time didn't want her presence there. He believed it was not going to be conducive to the population, and he denied her entry. And so she then came to Britain, where she continued her activism. She continued as a staunch communist, continued mobilising people, politicising people. And also started the first black newspaper here, the West Indian Gazette. So she was very much instrumental in that. But she also worked with a team. It wasn't just Claudia Jones. It was a team of people pushing and promoting equality and the culture of us as African and Caribbean people.
So we saying the carnival had like a political birth to it.
So these were the things that were rumbling about in the background. Then we had the murder of Kelso Cochrane in 1959 and Antiguan Carpenter. That was the sort of crescendo of that violence which stemmed in from the sort of the riots. Whereby, if you look at the images and footage of his funeral, you'll see that there were sort of thousands of people gathered, both black and white, and it was enough is enough. Something has got to be done. So people began to mobilise out of that. As we have Claudia, the Communist Party were also very active. Claudia continued running her indoor cabaret for several years, and then in 1965, 66. You had Ronnie Laslett, who was a social worker, then decide to sort of create a festival. Her idea was that all of these poor people lived in the same slum together. They should come out and celebrate their culture together. So she had this concept, of which, bearing in mind that there were so many Trinidadians living, Trinidadians who were instrumental or key figures in Trinidad Carnival, who were here at that time. People like Boots, Fillmore Davison, Sterling Betancourt, Russ Henderson, Sonny Blacks as an individual who knew about the carnival culture. There were a whole host of Trinidadians who knew about carnival culture, and so therefore, when she invited Russ Henderson to participate as one of the cultural entities of her festival, that was the sort of nucleus that started the carnival. Because we have to also remember, at that period, we're coming out of post-war Britain, where people were still painting their houses black and brown. Do you know what I mean? As a result of air raids and stuff. Okay. Very dismal stuff. They didn't have that culture of dancing and gaiety and that flamboyance, you know what I mean, of dance. And that's what, when Russ Henderson came out with his steel pan, you can certainly see from the early photographs that the Africans and the Caribbeans automatically embraced that and were out in the streets dancing. And the whites were generally sort of reduced to, in many instances, the doorsteps. In those other scenes. However, it's fair to say, when you look at the early images, a lot of the costumes were Dickensian. It was also defined for the children. Ronnie Laslett's concept of the carnival was about the children. It was very, very, very mixed. Carnival, but I say that the art and the essence of it was what Russ Henderson had actually, Russ Henderson, Sterling Betancourt, Ralph Cherry and that crew had sort of introduced to it. But it was a very, very mixed event. Black, white, there were Indian, Ukrainians from what I understand. There was the Dagenham Girl Pipers.
Okay.
So it was a very, very sort of broad festival and celebration at that time.
So when you look at Carnival now, in comparison to its roots, like where it took to create it and where it was, I don't know if like even at that time there, if there was a like an awareness of why Carnival is taking place, like why Carnival was taking place.
I think it certainly mutated over the years. For that immigrant group who were here, who came over as labourers, workers on London Transport, workers in the NHS, that sort of broad body of sort of working class people from Africa or from the Caribbean, primarily, it was a time to reconnect with your island or with the Caribbean. Whether it be through food, culture, dance, music, it gave them that memory of home. So the carnival was an island in and of itself as a cultural celebration that people could sort of be at and celebrate for 2 days of the year. So it became that symbolic sort of sense of home, memory, resistance, trials and the struggles, the trials and tribulations. And also it was also called of saying we're here. Yeah. If you look at when you look at Britain, for example, and you look at some of the things that define the black identity, Carnival is a very powerful and instrumental vehicle in that, whether you understand the dynamics of the history or not.
Yeah. So, like I said, so as it is now, do you still see those roots and those expressions of culture?
Yes, the expressions and the roots of the culture is very much in there. It's there in the steel pan. It's there in the mask. It's there in the costumes. Some people argue that the costumes have changed. Things have changed over the years, but those sort of evolutionary processes and conservative arguments happen also in Trinidad and any carnival across the world. You'll find people who grew up with it in one tradition, in one generation, critiquing the expressions of the future generation and mutations that may have taken place over the change in the course of their lifetime.
What about the bad publicity that Carnival gets as well?
The media tends to summarise Carnival as a result in terms of violence, crime, and drugs. And that isn't what the Carnival is about. If you look at the sort of numbers of people who attend the Carnival each year, you've got 1 million to 2 million people attend. When you look at the crime stats that they wheel out each year, in comparison to the number of people who have attended, it's, it can be lowered. Yes, it's still a challenge because one crime is too much, and you should always try to sort of see how you can lower and lessen these sort of things. However, the media does not shine that spotlight on other festivals in the same way that they do the Carnival. No other festival in this country do they summarise it through the sort of crime statistics. And sometimes there are legitimate issues. Sometimes, yes, there are elements of violence, but you don't then say, let's stop the festival, look what the organisers have done. It's like, how do we sort of lower crime? How do we lessen the effects of criminality at an event of this scale? But it's going to be inevitable. It is inevitable, but
you're saying in relation to the other festivals.
But when you do comparisons to the Notting Hill Carnival in comparison to that of say other festivals like Glastonbury, like Tina Park, like Boomtown, when you scale up and do a statistical comparison in terms of arrests, you'll find that actually Notting Hill Carnival is relatively safe in consideration that it attracts 1 to 2 million people, whereby Glastonbury may attract 250,000 or 200,000 or 180,000. You've got to scale this thing up to sort of get a true comparison or a true understanding of the sort of numbers of arrests. If the media summarise Carnival via the number of arrests, then do so for all the other festivals. But I think it's a shame.
So do you think the reason behind that is so?
Sorry?
That the spotlight of like violence and things like that are on?
Well, I think there certainly is there certainly is an element of racism. The fact that the carnival is seen as black managed, black run, they've never really fully been able to sort of come to terms with that, and through their own prejudices, their own racism, that's how they tend to sort of frame things. You know, it's always through the prism of crime, drugs, and violence, and whenever people of colour seem to do things, that's how the media just tends to reduce it.
You ain't gonna front. Ain't never heard no reports of any type of crime or problem that other carnivals, festivals, need to be shut down because of any type of violence, drugs, or. And I know Glastonbury. I ain't never been myself still, but I can imagine still like the bag of drugs that people get taken there and volunteer.
Well, if you can imagine the number of people who die at these festivals each year, and there've been deaths at festivals this year. I think there was a death at Leeds, if I'm right. I've got to double check on that, but certainly last year. Look at do some research. Look at the numbers of young white teenagers who died at festivals last year. It must have been at least about 5 or 6 who died at music festivals taking drugs. Nice. Yet the media does not focus on them. And had these deaths taken place at Notting Hill, it would be a whole another story. And so that's the sort of that's the sort of pass that these white-led festivals have in regards to this type of crime and drugs. When you look at sort of Boomtown, and I don't want to slander any other festival. Do you know what I'm saying? But when you look at sort of the seizures that they see, sometimes they see £70,000, £180,000 worth of drugs in one festival. Scale that stuff up, and you're in like £3-4 million worth of drug bust your carnival. That sort of thing is just preposterous. But they will never frame it in that way. They're making these big major drug seizures across festivals at festivals across this country.
The unity.
Say again, Uncle.
The unity outweighs the drawbacks of Carnival.
That's what I was going to ask you. Still, what do you feel like are the benefits of Carnival running like in this day and age, as opposed to obviously when it started, where there was all the racial tensions?
Well, if you look at it from its genesis, and it was about bringing people together, celebrating the culture, understand, a release. Bringing over the carnival from Trinidad in all of its grandeur, it's had a major impact. If you look at sort of multiculturalism, what it does in terms of exposing the culture, the music, the traditions, it does all of that. And you look at how the state used the carnival, primarily when you look at sort of whereby. In all the history where they've been talking about stopping the carnival, we've got to stop this event, it's got to go, it's got to stop. You look at the 2 years whereby there was relatively positive coverage on the carnival, and that would have been 2011 and 2012. And why was that? Because in 2011 we had one of the most violent uprisings in this country that had been seen in generations as a result of the death of Mark Duggan. And that happened in August. And that went on, it was total sort of anarchy on the streets for over a week or so. It took the police about 10-11 days to sort of really got to get a grip of what was happening on the streets. And that was about a couple of weeks just before the carnival was supposed to happen. And anyone would have thought, I thought myself, if they're going to start the carnival, this would be the point. Because we'd seen what had happened as a result of the death of Mark Duggan. Things right across London, right across the country, there was pockets of violence and looting and other sort of modes of civil disobedience. So if they were going to stop it, that would have been a point. They didn't stop it. They said it must go on. The show must go on. And why did the show have to go on? Because we had the 2012 London Olympics happening the year later, and they'd already they'd used the carnival as a means to sort of win this bit, to showcase the multiculturalism of Britain. And here we had them using the carnival as one of the venues, as an entertainment venue for those international foreign visitors who'd come here, who'd come to the Olympics, and we're going to go and visit the Paralympics. So that's why that happened. So we've seen that even at that sort of dangerous crux in history, they were willing to accept it because it served their interests. serve their interests, and as with everything else, like the Windrush, once we've come, we've served, but once you're of no longer in use, dash it away. And that's how we've been treated as a people in this country, and that's exactly how they've sort of viewed the Notting Hill Carnival, and I think they should embrace it as part of the British cultural landscape. It does a lot for this country, and the country uses it to promote and market itself. When I was in Venezuela in 1999, I got caught up in the floods, which killed I think about 40,000 people, and I had to sort of declare myself to the British Embassy. And when I went into the embassy in Caracas in 1999, I walked into the embassy, and right there, the first thing that greeted me was a massive poster framed, pride of place. In the British Embassy in Venezuela of the Carnival, of Notting Hill Carnival, so they're using that to kind of sell the culture. Again, in Cuba, I was trying to get a friend a visa to come and visit the UK. Had to go to the British Embassy. Went to the British Embassy in Cuba. First thing I seen on the wall, pride of place, same, was another poster of Carnival. So if you can exploit it in that way, you should also embrace it. Because it does. The state recognises the international value of it. It just doesn't understand the domestic value of it.
So what do you see as the future? What do you think is the future for the carnival?
Well, the future really depends upon those who are organising the carnival, their vision for the future. I think there should be a longer. Yes, we do. There should be a long-term vision for the event. I think. Pardon me. I think we've got to look at what is the carnival brand. At the moment, the media and the state controls, shapes and moulds the carnival brand by its media coverage and its summary every year. By summarising the carnival as a crime fest of drugs and and violence, then that's what the brand becomes as they've pushed it. So which sponsor is going to want to attach their name to that brand? Do you know what I mean? And so those are the real challenges. It's about now shaping that brand, creating your own narrative. It's like if there's only Coca-Cola on the market, that's all you'll drink until Pepsi's introduced.
So don't the organisers ain't they got their own...
Alpha, can you just go and have a look who's at the door? Alpha, go and shout out at the door, see who's out there.
Ain't the organisers got their own media outlets for their representation of what happens at Carnival?
Sorry?
And the organisers of the event Carnival, and they got their own media outlets where they can...
It's been a challenge. It's a real challenge. If you understand that the Carnival is produced on a peppercorn budget of next to nothing, and each year I wonder how do they, how do they manage to sort of make the event happen with such limited resources? But they do because of the love of it. There's a whole load of things that need to kind of happen. To shape and get this carnival ready. Me personally, I think that it's about creating that brand, attracting in the right sort of sponsors, gaining financial independence, having a vision of seeing where the carnival's going, how it's mutating, and where you'd like to see it in 5 years' time, how it's going to be integrated within the society that Middle England accepts the carnival as part of the British cultural landscape. There are serious challenges, but that really depends upon how visionary and focused those who are leading the carnival. There's been a shake-up in the background. People are aware of the challenges at the moment. It's about unifying the carnival community. Those sort of overtures are taking place behind the scenes. It's going to take a little time, but it will happen. It is happening, and then you'll start seeing some of the ideas and the visions for the future manifesting themselves. So it is happening. I'm certainly confident that we've seen movement in that direction.
Yeah, so we say that the carnival look good to keep running for the future then.
It looks that way, of course. Who's going to stop it? How do you tell people to you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, carnival done. What do you mean? What do you think is going to happen when you say the carnival done?
You know? No, they're madness still.
But I do wish that young people look deeper than just the sound systems and the music. And look at the broader culture of the carnival, what it means, have an understanding of why you're here. If you claim it as yours, this is ours, this is my carnival. If you claim it as your carnival, you have a responsibility to know what that carnival is and what it's about and what its history is and what it means and what it signifies. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You know, looking at Carnival as a celebration of the ending of slavery and coming out and you know what I mean? It's something very, very symbolic that we should honour each year, but honour it for what it symbolises, what it's supposed to mean. You know, and if we reduce the ending of slavery to 2 days of jumping up in the street, getting drunk and partying, listening to that tune, and saying that's what it is, then I don't think it's doing our ancestors any justice, and it's not a service to the legacy of it's not a service to the legacy of our people.
I hear that still. I don't know, Uncle. Respect for doing the interview still. I know you're short on time and that still, so yeah, enough respect.
Nice one, B.
Yeah?
Yeah, man. Respect, Black. Abraham.
Come take over everything. From your melody.
Come, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
Yeah. This is the office.
Listen.
You say more time you're over here,
Yeah. Every day.
I might have to come back in the daytime still.
Yeah, like, bruv, it gets active all times of the day. It's active in the morning, dies down, then gets active again. Like right now, it ain't as active, but yeah, there's people out.